This episode contains material that might be triggering for some. If you need to stop the podcast at any time to take care of yourself, please do so.
If you need support, you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988. Dialectical behavior therapy was created in the 1980s by Marsha Linehan in Seattle, Washington.
Today, DBT is taught all over the world.
We're two therapists who believe everyone can benefit from DBT skills.
I'm Kate.
I'm Michelle.
And this is DBT and Me. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Q&A number 46, which
Yippee.
In the mere moments between when I was like, oh, right, I'm doing the intro, and now, and I tried to think of something clever to come up with for the number 46, the closest I came up with is that half of 46 is 23, which is a prime number, so that's cool.
Fun fact.
I know, right? Like, I'm really stretching. I don't have any ideas.
This will only get harder the more the numbers increase.
No, we're approaching on 50, and 50 is just a good number.
That is a good number. That's a milestone number.
Right? But now the milestones are further apart, though. 50, the next one's like 75, 100, right? We're like going up by larger increments now. So you're right, we're just going to have to start like doing a little research. In 1946, in the year 46, it's going to be a long time before we know much of what happened. Anyway, it is our Q&A. Hey, there you go. That rhymes.
There we go.
All right, I'm just going to say it because I thought I could fake it better. I'm really nauseated today, guys. So if my sense of humor is even more punch drunk than usual.
You have a good reason.
I get a little silly when sick, which I know is a horrible surprise to everyone.
Yeah, such a bummer.
All right, but you start us today with a really short one.
Yeah, a really short one to start off. So this one just says, and this first line is in quotes. So the line is, I don't want to have to put on a performance just to deserve love. And then the listener says, this is a line that keeps going through my head. But is this willfulness?
Good question. No, moving on. No, no, I don't think so at all. We can be steadfast about something without being willful, right? For instance, man, now I feel like some sort of like biblical scholar, but with DBT. For instance, if one thinks about, right, sticking to your values in fast, right, that's a place where you're really you're not giving ground, right? You're holding to one position really steadfastly, but it's not willfulness, right? We're allowed to have sort of bedrocks of belief, our foundational values, right? Our morals and things like that don't move much. I will say, I strongly recommend being open to new information that makes you wildly change your mind about things, because that happens now and again. But more or less, we can have some things that are very close to immovable within us without it being willfulness, right, at all. I would say that one place you might be able to check, shall we see, for if this is willfulness or not, is sort of checking the facts around that assertion. Something along those lines, right? Or if you're having a moment where you think that's being disproven, check the facts there. Something where you can sort of look for validation of the assertion that you're having. And while this has nothing to do necessarily with a specific DBT skill, just a lot of self-compassion, right? Whenever that belief is feeling tested, right? Or also, I suppose that for that sentence, right, I don't want to put on a performance just to deserve love, is almost a form of self-compassion, right? Or self-validation, self-acknowledgement, something in there.
Mm-hmm.
think those are my thoughts. Not a lot to say, but other than a resounding no, in my opinion, anyway.
That this is not willfulness.
Yes.
Yeah, and I have the same thought that this is not willfulness, because I hold the belief that, we are worthy of love just for being ourselves. Like, I'm with this listener, the idea of needing to put on a performance, trying to achieve love, doesn't feel good. And we talk about this whole concept of like real, true love in all its forms is ideally love that's unconditional. We use that word unconditional a lot in conjunction with the idea of love, that it means loving somebody on their best day and loving them on their worst day, rather than saying, I will only love you if you do X, Y, or Z, or I will only love you if you are on your A game at all times. It's not realistic. And many would say that that's actually not love, if there is this idea of having to perform to get it. I think in some ways, especially here in the US, where we are very much a culture that talks a lot about achievement, I think we are given messages that we do need to do things that are, you could say, performance based. We do need to achieve things or prove our value or prove our worth, like especially in workplace settings. We are supposed to check certain boxes and perform certain tasks. And then when we do it, then we're told that we are a good employee. And then we hopefully anyways get certain rewards, such as, getting promotions or getting a pay raise or that kind of a thing. But when it comes to love, we don't want that to be what's behind it. We don't want what goes on at work to be translated into personal relationships. So those are just my thoughts a little bit. Nothing DBT in there at all. But also just saying, I don't think it's willfulness. And this is why I don't think it's willfulness, to want to just be loved for who you are, rather than feeling like you have to earn love or only be loved based off of what you do or what you can provide for someone else. That doesn't feel good.
No, it doesn't. Yeah. All right, on with the next one then. This one says, over the past few months, my life has turned for the better. I am almost done with my first semester at university and have started exam season. Even though I've been really stressed about it, I haven't used my destructive behaviors. Instead, I reached out to my parents and got support from them. This is a huge thing for me, as I wouldn't have been able to handle any of this last year. But lately, I feel like I miss being sick. I don't even know what it is that I miss about it. I was miserable. But now I catch myself romanticizing self-harm and purposefully listening to my depressed playlist. Being sad and miserable felt kind of safe. Logically, I know that this is a state of mind I do not ever want to go back to, but at times I almost crave being deep into my depression. How do I get over this? I'm terrified of slipping and not being able to get back up. And I'm so ashamed of having these thoughts. I would love some input on this and maybe some skills I could try to move forward.
This may sound weird. I loved this post. I was so glad that somebody had the courage to name this. To say,
no, I agree.
Yeah, to say I miss being sick. Sometimes I find myself wanting to go back there, even though I don't want to go back there, right? Like, just naming that, I think, is so common, and people don't talk about it because there's stigma around it. We know pretty clearly what is socially acceptable and how we are supposed to act and behave, and then what is frowned upon. We just get so much messaging around that. And yes, it is frowned upon to self-harm. It is frowned upon to be depressed. So to be able to name, sometimes I want those things. it's just a brave thing to do. But yeah, this is really common. And the reason why is because as human beings, we're kind of hardwired to want to return to like a state of homeostasis and what we know. There are things that feel very familiar to us, things that we know, and then there are things that feel new. And even if those familiar things are not necessarily healthy, and even if the new things would be far better for our mental health in the long run, our brain has to do a lot more work to adjust and adapt to whatever the new thing is that we're trying to do. But if you're used to being in, just random examples here, but living in a chaotic environment or being in an abusive relationship or whatever it may be, if that's what you're used to and your brain has adjusted to that, and then you're like, hey, brain, we're going to go do something totally different. Your brain's going to be like, what? To some degree. It takes a lot of work to adapt to something new, to create a new normal is so difficult. And I think we romanticize that, honestly. That's what we romanticize a lot of, just kind of like, you'll feel so much better when you start, changing what you're eating and just start like exercising more and start doing all these things. And it's like, the path to get there is not so easy. But a couple things that I want this listener to remember, or anybody who has felt this way, which, like I said, is very common. Thoughts don't equal action. So I tell people all the time, like with my clients, they'll be like, Michelle, I'm thinking about this thing and I feel so bad about it. And I'm like, okay. So you're thinking about it. And they're like, yeah. And they're like, I'd never, ever, ever do it. But like, I'm thinking about it. And I'm like, okay. Like we think things all the time that we don't act on. So it's really important, I believe anyways, to not shame ourselves for the thoughts or the emotions that we have when those things do not get translated into actions that could potentially have really harmful repercussions for us or another human being. We can think whatever we want. So for this listener to be in this state of like, I'm thinking a lot about self-harm, I'm listening to my depressed playlist, but guess what, listener? You are not back there. You're not self-harming. You're not, finding yourself in a depressed state for weeks at a time. Okay, right? Like as long as what we're thinking and feeling are not being translated into harmful actions, in my mind, you have the green light to think and feel whatever you want. The listener also asks about skills, right? Some skills I could try to move forward there at the end. So a couple DBT skills that I thought about. I think opposite action is really going to be the name of the game here, so that those thoughts and feelings do not start being translated into actions that the listener may not actually want to be engaging in. So when we're doing opposite action, there are, other DBT skills that can help us do that sometimes. So I was thinking too that accepts would be one way the opposite action could look for this listener. So finding ways to distract yourself may be really helpful as a form of opposite action here. Also, really in a lot of ways, if you're doing opposite action for this, you are also riding the wave. Like those two things are going to go hand in hand here, where it's like, hey, I'm having these thoughts, and also you're not acting on them. So chances are you're riding the wave of the thoughts to help you not go to a place where you're acting on what you're thinking. And I also thought it will just be really important to radically accept this. That's the note I'm ending on, is the note of radical acceptance. But just accepting that this may come up for you periodically throughout the rest of your life. It may, where you have these times where it's like, gosh, yeah, I miss being sick. I I wish I was depressed right now. I'm not, but there's part of me that wishes I was, kind of a thing. Yeah, this may come up periodically for a long time. And hopefully when this comes up, you're able to, I mean, Kate was talking about this with the last listener, having some compassion for yourself and also able to, yep, as I was just saying, ride that wave and recognize that just because you're thinking about the time when you were sick, missing the time when you were sick, doesn't mean you're actually going to go back to how you were when you were sick. But those thoughts may just crop up. They may for a long time, and just to accept them when they come. Of course, like everything with radical acceptance, so much easier said than done. But that, I think, will really help so that you're not beating yourself up or thinking something's wrong with you when this happens. That's what I don't want. Okay, I think I've talked long enough there. On to you, Kate.
Well, to start with, just to say, yeah, just like you were saying, Michelle, this is a super duper normal thing. As sadly are the feelings of guilt and shame around it. It doesn't seem to be much talked about, and not a very out in the open process. Not a very out in the open part of the process of mental health treatment or recovery or just having mental health issues. So yeah, absolutely super normal. And I feel like there can be so many different reasons or ways for it. Michelle, I absolutely agree with you with the homeostasis thing. Another one I think about is the idea of reinforcements. It's not mental health, but bear with me, guys, and I swear this will be relevant. It was, okay, I don't know how long ago it was, other than to say definitely sometime this calendar year. Time has been wonky. I found myself deeply wishing I could have a migraine, which is weird because I get migraines, usually at least once a month. I don't like them. They're horrible. They're one of the worst things about my life. So it would seem on the surface really quite strange, that I found my thoughts wandering to wishing I had a migraine that day. And the reason why, and I even had this in my thought, was I wish I had a migraine today so I could just lay around and do nothing. Because it turns out I have a hard time letting myself lay around and watch what amounts to reruns of old television shows for an entire day if I'm not essentially better couch-ridden by a migraine. And I was not taking care of myself in that way. Right? I wasn't giving myself that kind of rest through other means. And so I found myself like, well, I guess the suffering part would be okay if it came with me giving this other kind of care to myself. And so the first thing I found myself wondering about when I was reading this listener's inquiry was, were you taking better or different care of yourself when you were sick? Were you getting more or better attention from those around you? Were you giving yourself more leeway or more slack? Right? Like there's so many ways that, or so many different opportunities for ways that you might be treating yourself differently right now. Maybe something is missing from that you were getting when you were sick. From yourself or from your environment. And so that's something I would suggest bringing some curiosity to, is just, all right, was there someplace I or those around me were kinder to me when I was exhibiting, really in the depths of my depression? So that was one thing that occurred to me. The other one was, it's not, there's not a lot said in this post about how long this person has suffered from their depression, but something that I've encountered in myself and in many clients is that depression or other mental health issues can feel foundational to who we are, right? Like again, just to tell my own story as an illustration, I don't know, I remember my therapist telling me I wouldn't hate myself forever and basically laughing at her. And then when we started making progress that direction, I remember being actually scared because I didn't know who I was if I didn't hate myself. because I'd always hated myself. I didn't have memories of not hating myself. Mm-hmm. And so maybe this was a broken arm that kept punching me in my face, but it was still an arm I'd had my whole life, and it felt very strange that you were suggesting amputating it. Right?
The double you know versus the double you don't.
Exactly! Yes, this awful thing punches me in the face 24 hours a day for the whole of my life, but I'm used to it. Right? This is the only context I know myself in. And it can be really scary, the idea of losing your identity. Right? It may not be a conscious part of our identity, like, yep, I am a depressed person, how are you? But in how we understand ourselves. Right? Mm-hmm. Whether or not it's part of how we tell our story to others, it can become very foundational or very interwoven into the fabric of the story how we tell our own story to ourselves. And that's scary to lose. So just another couple of ideas as to reasons that it's really totally normal to go through this. And I guess, I don't know, Michelle, you brought a couple of skills in that I loved. I don't know that I would add too many to them other than perhaps, and this isn't a DBT skill, but I think a skill nonetheless, just bringing curiosity to it, right? Shame and guilt both tend to, they tend to shut down curiosity. And also, they are sometimes shut down by curiosity. Curiosity doesn't fit well with shame most of the time. Shame is a conclusion, right? Whereas curiosity is a question. And so if you can maybe bring some gentle curiosity to yourself, not how fucked up am I that I wish I were sick again, but I wonder why I'm wishing I were sick again. I think that could do a lot to shift your relationship to yourself around the issue. And maybe give you some starting points. Maybe whatever the answer to that is, or the answers, more likely. Might give you a starting place on where you might be able to nurture yourself in a new context, I guess. Yeah.
Great thoughts.
Thanks.
Okay, next one. So this one says, breakdowns triggered by what you were told as a kid. I thought I'd thrown out or lost my AirPods that my partner gave me for my birthday. I tipped out everything in my bag and my washing basket, checked the trash, and drove back to work, and I still hadn't found them. Growing up, my dad would always drop the "this is why we can't have nice things" line to me, but without the irreverent humor. I was disorganized, messy, rough, and overactive as a kid, and these comments made me really aware of needing to fix my behavior. So, cue me ugly crying on the floor, retelling myself all the things my dad told me, and telling myself every negative thing from poor body image to being a bad friend. When I get really upset, I tend to not want to talk to anyone. But it's so difficult to calm myself down, and while a part of me thinks, what can I do to self-soothe, I also think, I will not change the way I feel. I also tend to tense up and squeeze every muscle and get cramps when I get this upset. I managed to find the AirPods underneath my bedside table, which is a perk of crying on the ground, they say. So now I'm just trying to catch my breath, ease my headache before having to now clean up the contents I tipped out into my room. Ironically, I wanted my earphones because I've been traveling for work and wanted to take the afternoon to unpack and reorganize. Looks like I've doubled my work now. Does anyone else deal with those things people have said that upset them but have brought with them into adulthood? I'm also not sure if I'm the only one who seems to have a full-on meltdown over misplacing an item, but I'm capable of dealing with life-changing news like the death of a family member in almost a textbook way.
There's a lot.
There is a lot. I was just having that same thought rereading this one. I'm like, yeah, there are a lot of things to touch on here, which is why I numbered my responses to this. I'm like, number 1, number 2, number 3.
Smart,
there's a
Michelle.
Lot. Yeah,
you're
all good
smart
stuff though.
All right, well then, I trust you'll get to everything, and I may not.
We'll see.
So the first question, like just explicit question at the end here, is just, does anyone else deal with these things? And the answer is absolutely yes. I've definitely had plenty of clients that have. I myself certainly have. Right, there are things that I've had to inform partners and friends about at times to explain why something seemingly benign engendered such a huge reaction in me. And this is everything from turns of phrase to hand gestures to being followed up the stairs, right? It doesn't, things that had a big enough impact tend to get carried with us, right? Be those positive or negative things. They tend to have the most staying power. So first of all, I hope you normalize the fuck out of yourself for that one, because yes, lots of people deal with that. Maybe even most.
I was going to say maybe or another, even everyone.
Maybe even everyone? Yeah, I was going to say, depending on the severity. Maybe, yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Maybe actually everybody. So yes, normal as fuck. So that's part one. When you were talking about being the only one who has full-on meltdown over a tiny thing, but then deal with, decent amounts of aplomb with, life-shattering things, that is definitely a place that you are, not alone either. The way that I think about it is, I don't know, like buckets, right? There can be a lot of reasons why your bucket might be hanging out really entirely full. One of those may be being really good in emergencies, right? Maybe you're so used to stuffing or needing to be calm in emergencies that fills up your bucket really quickly. And if you want to allow yourself to slosh over during those more important things, well, the excess has to come out somewhere, sometime, somehow, right? And so, if you think about it, if you have, a bucket so full of water that it's nothing but surface tension holding that in there, you can drop a pretty small rock in that bucket and get an awful lot of overflow, right? And that's kind of how I imagine it, right? When someone's like, well, I do fine over here, but then the tiniest little thing will just send me into like crisis mode. I look at, where will you allow yourself to have those emotions, right? Where are you stuffing them down, right? Where are you allowing them to show up, and where are you stuffing them down? And also just, how full is your bucket? Yeah. If your bucket's sufficiently full, it's not going to take much to induce a full-on meltdown over whatever tiny thing, right? Might be there to drop the proverbial rock in. Gosh, what else? There could also be an amount. Sorry. I just realized, I was like, I know I reread my notes. Why don't I now remember what I meant when I said there? So apparently I just took the two questions from the end and then went way back to the beginning. To the part where they say, part of me is, where is it? Oh, part of me thinks, what can I do to self-soothe? And I also think, I will not change the way I feel. Do you have that one in there?
Yes, I do. I do have that, because that stood out to me too with what they were saying. Uh-huh.
I don't know why I addressed them in opposite order, but yeah, that was the other one that stood out to me too. And I was just saying, like, try to catch it, see what the threat is, and move through to willingness if you can. Right? When you pass into that, not literally, this isn't what the listener actually said, but the I don't wanna, right? It was just sort of how I envision most willfulness. Once you can catch it, right? By catch it, I mean notice it, right? Notice that you're doing it. If you can see what the threat is, like why you have your back up so hard, right? Why you're being rigid about it, that might help you to let go of that rigidity and move through into that, well, what can I do to self-soothe a little bit more easily than you are right now? So those were my thoughts.
Great.
I think.
Well, that's perfect that you end on that note, because that's where I wanted to begin.
Oh,
was
perfect.
Was with that line, right?
Yeah.
And also the same way that I felt a lot of gratitude to the last listener for really openly sharing like, hey, I have these thoughts and I feel so much shame around them. I appreciated this listener saying what they said about like, part of me thinks, what can I do to self-soothe? But I also think I will not change the way I feel. I think a lot of people think that, right? And we'll hear this sometimes from people where they're like, there's a part of me that wants to use a skill, and there's another part of me that's like, fuck using skills. Like, it's too hard to use skills. I'm just, gonna do what I normally do. It's very, very common, once again. But I wanted to clarify something for this listener that I think is important to clarify as a whole when it comes to some stuff with DBT. DBT is not about changing the way you feel.
Oh, good catch, Michelle.
Yeah, I think this is what we think a lot, right? Why else would we be using the skills? We're using the skills to change what we feel. No. We're changing the skill, we're using the skills to change what we do. Dialectical behavior therapy. What is the thing that you do when you typically feel that way? And this is what was being talked about in the last one as well. It's okay to think to yourself, gosh, I'm missing feeling depressed. I feel a longing to be depressed, right? That's okay. They can feel that all day long. Not a problem. It's all about what you do with it. So self-soothing, in this case, because that's the skill they said, self-soothing is not about changing what you're feeling. That may happen. Because we talk about this sometimes about top down versus bottom up. Sometimes when we do something, it does change what we're thinking and feeling. And sometimes when we do change what we think and feel, then it impacts what we do. But self-soothing is not about getting yourself to stop feeling the emotion that you're feeling. That's not the goal of it. The goal of that skill in particular, but again, I would say at large, with a lot of DBT skills, is to help you be with that emotion in a way that you probably wouldn't be before. Okay, I'm feeling this thing. Now what? Now what do I do? If typically when I feel anger, I go and throw things. All right, well, this time when I feel anger, I'm going to go do accepts. For example, I'm just throwing that out there. This time when I feel anger, I'm going to go do TIPP, which we're actually talking about in the next thing we're about to read. Whatever it is, you're choosing a different thing. And like I said, maybe the emotion changes as a result of doing the skill, but that's not ever the goal. The goal is just to have you not do, right, problem behaviors. That's the goal. So when you catch yourself getting into that way of thinking of like, do I do the skill and change my experience potentially, or do I not do anything different? The goal is never to change what you're feeling. So just important to clarify there. Now on to the two questions at the end, which you already did a really nice job of addressing, Kate. So I don't know if I'm going to say anything too different, but I'm really going to echo that first thing about, does anyone else deal with those things people have said that upset them and brought that stuff into adulthood? Absolutely. I believe that we as therapists would not have a job if that wasn't the case. This is why therapy exists, because people are trying to shed those things a lot of the time. They're realizing, oh, hey, I'm acting this way now in my 40s, and it's reminding me of this thing that happened when I was 10. Oh, okay. Time to go to therapy to see if you can shed that. And yeah, so as I was chiming in when you were talking about this, Kate, I really think this is universal. Yeah. I don't think this is just the result for people who have dealt with pretty big traumas. If you have dealt with pretty big traumas, that may mean you're carrying more stuff with you into adulthood. But as somebody who, we've named this before on the podcast, as somebody who does not really have childhood trauma in the way that you would inevitably, what am I trying to say here? In the way that you would typically, Yeah, the way that you would typically think about it. I had a really happy, healthy childhood. And you know what? I hear my mom's voice saying stuff to me all the time. All the time. And this is after, 6+ years of therapy and counting. I still am working to undo some of that. So it's very common. And also something where I wanted to give this listener a pat on the back and be like, that's really awesome that you're noticing this and recognizing whose voice it is. That alone is big work to recognize oh, this is my dad. Because sometimes we don't know exactly where it's stemming from. Sometimes we know really clearly and sometimes it's a little more muddy. So to already have that clarity is super important. With the second question, right, about, is it weird to be able to handle big things really well, but then struggle to handle small things? Kate, you already spoke to that really nicely. I liked your bucket metaphor there. I thought that was really, really great. I just was thinking too about how there can be various factors that impact how we respond to different things. I've noticed, I'll just own it, with my husband. When someone else is experiencing stress, like me, for example, I got in a car accident 4 years ago and he was calm as a cucumber. He was my rock that entire day. And I kind of almost wondered, why isn't he freaking out about this? I just wrecked my car and now we have to buy a new one. And this is incredibly stressful. But it didn't feel as stressful to him because it happened to me. When somebody else is struggling, I've noticed that he gets really calm and he jumps into this mode of no matter how big the thing is that they're struggling with, it could be a really big thing, but it really impacts him differently than if it's a stress that is a direct impact to him, right? If he had been in the car accident, would have probably been night and day different how he would have responded with the stress. So that can be a factor sometimes for different people that maybe you can check in with yourself of oh, is it that when somebody else is experiencing something really stressful, I get super calm, but when it's me, that's when I have a hard time? Or that can go vice versa, right? Oh, somebody else is having a really hard time. Oh, I kind of feel pressure to help them and I get really stressed versus when it's me, oh, I deal with my own shit, whatever. So that could be a factor. Also, whether or not the stress is expected or not. Sometimes we see things coming. Sometimes we don't. That can be a huge, huge factor. I find that for myself, if I'm going into a day being today should be smooth sailing, and then that day goes left, I'm going to be way more stressed than if I'm already going into a day being oh, today may be kind of a hard day. And then it is, I don't feel as stressed for me. So just things to think about and notice within yourself. But yeah, our brains and our nervous systems can respond very differently depending on the type of stress. And there could be a lot of different factors for why that is. So also just normalizing, really, that experience.
Yeah, it's true. I don't think we have too much to say, honestly, about this last one.
Yeah.
I will say points go to them for putting this in a way that I might struggle not to giggle while reading it. We'll see.
I know. I like that we're ending on this note. This is a great one to end on.
It's a good one. So this person says, does anyone else struggle to hold their breath for the full 30 seconds while doing the TIPP temperature cold water skill? Or am I just really unfit? Also, my brain during. What if I pass out with my head underwater? Has anyone died doing this skill? Will my body be found face first in a soup pot because I don't own a bowl big enough for my head? Has anyone died in a soup pot?
Yeah. Every time I've read this one, I laughed.
Me too.
Well, and it's totally in line, Kate, with I think how you and I approach DBT, which is we want there to be hopefully some lightness to some things where it can be found. So this is just perfect. In all seriousness, though, do not put pressure on yourself to do the full 30 seconds. No. It is completely okay if you do not make it a full 30 seconds with holding your breath underwater. There is a disclaimer in the DBT skills workbook that's basically like, don't do this if you have certain medical conditions. So that is something legitimate to keep in mind with doing the T from TIPP. But yeah, I mean, it really is finding that balance between this is meant to feel a little bit uncomfortable. It's not going to feel, quote unquote, like good or pleasant to put your face in a bowl of water for, up to 30 seconds. That's not going to feel nice. But we also don't want it to feel unsafe at the same time. Like if you legitimately are like, I'm starting to see stars or something, whatever might be happening for you while you're doing it. Yes, absolutely. Stop, pull your head out of that soup pot so that you do not accidentally die in it. We don't want that to be the outcome here in any way. So yeah, I think it just takes practice for people with the T to figure out that balance between like, okay, where's that line for me between, yeah, this feels uncomfortable, but I can tolerate it, and when do I actually need to stop because this is not good for me to continue doing. So you try to play around a little bit, but yeah, do not cross that line. We don't want that.
I will add only that I don't think you necessarily have to worry about being terribly out of shape, listener. I mean, maybe you are, I don't know. But I'm just saying this doesn't have to be an indication of it at all, because most of the time, if you're upset enough that you're wanting to use the T in TIPP, your breathing rate is probably abnormally elevated at the moment. It's going to be harder for you to hold your breath then than at a normal time and place. Also, I 100% agree with everything Michelle said. And Michelle, just since you're pointing out how different you and I are as humans, or something like, I just love it because yours ends with, please stop if you start to feel yourself on the verge of passing out. It's normal to be uncomfortable, but we don't want it to be unsafe, which is, again, totally true. But the thing I say is, if it's any consolation to your anxiety brain, if you were to suddenly pass out, you'd almost certainly end up wet and cold on the floor. Or you just end up wet and cold on the floor. Right? It's just how gravity works. If you're standing over top and your knees buckle, you're just going to fall over on the floor and douse yourself in the entire pot of ice water. Won't be pleasant, but you'll be okay. Anyway, right? So yes, very different ways of thinking of things. That's all.
Nice. I love it.
But yes, no, I totally get that. And yeah, just hold your breath for more or less as long as you can hold your breath. If you you're in a holding your breath contest, you don't wait until you die or pass out. You wait until you're like, nope, I need to breathe now. And then you breathe.
Yeah.
Breathe then.
Awesome. Oh, okay. Think we're ready to wrap up.
Yes.
All right.
That's you, I think, this time.
That is me. Yep. I am taking that on. So, if you have questions, send us an email at dbtmepodcast@gmail.com. And if you're part of the Facebook group, if you're not, please find us on Facebook and join, so then you can post there. But keep the posts coming in the Facebook group. We love seeing the community be really active and really supporting each other. That brings us great joy to see all that. So, yeah, we'll see you guys next time.
Yep. Until 47.
Until 47. All right. Bye, everybody. To learn more about us and the DBT skills we're teaching each week, join our Facebook group. Simply log in to your Facebook profile and search for